Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to Cafe IO. In this video, we will talk of software architecture and its nuances. We'll also get into the life of an architect and understand what does an architect do, what are his roles and responsibilities. Let's get started. So how do we define architecture? There's lots of definitions out there. I would like to keep this conversation really simple and focus on some simple terms instead of jargons. So the first thing that comes to mind when we see an architecture, which is, a diagram representing something, and we'll try to demystify that something, is some boxes and lines, right? We always have some boxes and there are lines connecting those boxes. There's also a possibility of arrows, representing some sense of direction. It could be a unidirectional arrow, it could be bidirectional arrow. There could be additional constructs like colors which could symbolize different layers, but an architecture diagram generally consists of lots of boxes and lots of arrows. So that's a view which is used to consume and understand architecture. But what really is architecture? Let's try to understand by a simple example. So in the image one that I have a simple diagram, right? It's a house. We can call it an architecture, right? Is this an architecture? Maybe, maybe not. I'd like to think that it is an architecture because it is giving a meaning to the structure of the house, but it is very open to interpretation as to who is consuming it. If this is being consumed by the end customer who's going to live in the house, then this view is good enough. But if this view is for somebody, who has to build the house, this is absolutely pointless. Now, what about the diagram 2? There's an additional information here. So we have sun, we have light coming out, and then there's light and shade. Now, there isn't a lot of difference between the two diagrams, but it is giving very valuable information. What has changed? The architecture is still the same, but we have added more information. Would you call this as an architecture of the system or the number one as an architecture? The answer really is both of them define the system, right? So if I like to think of architecture as this large text, which is the system structure, right? Not a lot of fancy words, but the structure of a system, and the system could be anything, right? It could be a software system. It could be, universe. There's also architecture of the universe. It could be the house you're living in. But usually when we try and explain architecture, the building example is kind of very, analogous to it. So the system structure is important. Both of these diagrams have the system structure, but what differentiates them is the fitment to purpose, right? So there isn't a right or wrong architecture, and I've had enough of these conversations about, this is right or this is better. But I think all architectures are good. There could always be, conversations around which one fits the purpose better in that scenario, given the requirements and the constraints. We have talked about some of these non-functionals in the past. Do check out those videos. Let's go back to architecture. So what did we have? We have boxes and lines, and even here we have some boxes and lines, right? They're just arranged nicely, the shapes and circles. Now we also have systems and views, right? Which is what we are looking. So we are having a system and we are having different views. The first is a view which is just a view of the house. It just doesn't give any other information. But the other diagram gives valuable information as to which direction the sun is, right? If that concept is not clear, we can probably make a third diagram and we can have the same house, right? And then the sun could be on this side. You see that a lot of things changes. So the house is still the same, but the purpose has changed, right? So adding this information this is a view, right? So this in terminology we call it views and viewpoints as to how, from what perspective we are looking, but this is valuable information. Now there's also information about components, right? In the first we only talked of the house, but in the second diagram we are also talking of sun, right? Which is a component in the whole overall schema of things. There's also connectivity. While light cannot be thought as a connective medium, but in general in system and software system we talk of connectivity, right? Now there's two kinds of connectivity. Let's say if this is Okay, maybe I'll move this side. So let's say if this is component A and this is component B, this is one kind of connectivity, and this is component A, a bit of, zoomed in version, and there could be something here, something here, something here, and this is also connectivity, right? This is also, there's something another here and stuff like that. So there's also a lot of interrelationships around here. And then there are principles, and then there's governance, right? So what we have done is we have moved from a very tangible item and we have moved to understanding more abstract nature of the system. So I think the study of the structure of the system is architecture. The diagram or the representation of the architecture always have a fitment to purpose, and that's what an architecture diagram is expected to return. This is not talking of a certain style of architecture, but this is a very general conversation. You can use it to apply to monolith, microservices, cloud, or any of those are different architecture. We will talk about those specialized view in the future. Let's move further, right? So who is an architect? Very debatable conversation around the industry in general, and there's lots of architects, right? Well, first let's try and understand who is an architect. So what is the architect doing? He's connecting the dots, right? He's the one who's defining the views and making the connections and communication and understanding the intercommunications and stuff like that. He's not the one, remember, he's not the one getting into the details of this. So doing and let's say coding this isn't an architecture, isn't the job of an architect. He or she might know how to do that, that's a different matter. Now when you talk of this specific module, there's design and then there's architecture of the code also, but we're not talking of that very specifically, right? So let's move further. So somebody who connects the dot is an architect, somebody who sees the trade-offs, right? For example, in these three diagrams, which is better, what view to use, that's a trade-off. That's the job of an architect. Somebody who looks beyond the product, somebody who looks beyond the functionality, somebody who's aware of the behavior of the system, quality attributes of the system, non-functional requirements. Product managers would typically not get into those most of the time. So somebody who does that is an architect. He or she fights complexity, right? I think being an architect for quite a long time, complexity is one of the things that you're used to dealing with. One of your key job roles kind of is to fight complexity. So complexity can be in the form of system constructs, in the form of people constructs, in the form of technology constructs, and it could be even arising from something which is not in your control or in your control. There's a variety of conversations around complexity. And then finally, he is somebody who's a strategic thinker, who thinks strategically. There is always a fine balance between strategic thinking and tactical thinking. I like to think as architects should always be strategic thinkers. If there are tactical decisions being made, that's absolutely okay. But what needs to be understood is that strategic decisions are what drive the architecture. Tactical decisions might help a product team implement a certain project. So there could be some, design choice which you take, which we have to take that because of, people, time, technology, whatsoever be cost, whatsoever be the reason, we have to take that. But having a long-term strategic view is always kind of the job of an architect. Who is not an architect? He is not a senior developer in your team. While a lot of architects understand over a period of time the code of the system, if they have seen it, there's literally a war as to architects should code or not. I'm not going to get into that. I am one of those people who believes that architects should be aware of how to code. If not code, then they should be aware of how to, do debugging and stuff like that. But he's not a senior developer in your team, that's for sure. He's not a firefighter. He is somebody whom you use for making strategic decisions in your company. Don't use him for, handling every production support ticket and stuff like that. It's definitely not a project manager. I've seen a lot of architects get into, managing teams, managing people, managing the technical deliveries. That's not the job of an architect. You should I don't want to comment whether it's a good or bad thing, but a project manager is a project manager, and an architect has there are very well defined roles. Now let's move on a bit further, right? When we talk of architecture or architect in IT, there's a lot of confusion. There's probably, let me get the right zoom level. Done. So IT architect is a very general term, right? It could refer to anybody who's working in the IT industry, which is, all of these. But if you think about it, there's few specialized kind of architects, right? So what is an architect doing? So he's, talking to dev, talking to PM, talking to scrum master, talking to business, different kinds of people, sometimes even talking to testers and stuff like that. Now, depending on the kind of an architect you are, this role might sound, it's very pivotal, but it is a pivotal role. The architects usually move a lot of stuff around from an information standpoint. But if you think about it, this is an architect whom I would probably associate as a solution architect or a software architect. So software architect and a solution architect. Right? These are the two architects that fit this description. There could also be a data architect, but I don't think he or she should be full-time. But when you talk of some specialized architects like network architect, I don't think they would be talking to these groups. They would have a different group of people which are more specialized in nature. So there's network architect, there's cloud architect who specialized with cloud, and these are all specializations. I think all of these are architects, and they have chosen to specialize in a certain area where their interest lies or wherever there's a need. So there are network architects who would design the network, who will understand how does your network infrastructure look, how does your IP ranges look, how does your security of network look, IP ranges, blah blah blah. Cloud architects are designing for cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, understanding the ecosystem, understanding the cloud, understanding their services and stuff like that, right? What choices to make, how do these services communicate, finding the right interconnectivity, finding the right use cases, finding the number of services that is required for a use case, etc., etc. Security architects are specialized in security. They would look at the security posture of your company, understand vulnerabilities, to understand the network topology, design single sign-ons, make sure that your enterprise data is, well within boundaries of the security. They will be on scout for malware attacks, Trojan, viruses, stuff like that. So they are very niche people. Data architects are typically who deal with, databases, information management. So there's tons of data flowing in the companies, and data architect would be typically responsible for designing databases, designing schemas, making sure information management is correct. There's governance around it. There are principles around it. Solutions architect are kind of all-rounder or generic architects who I would think of them as a T-shape. So they either have specialized in one or few of them, or have a generic understanding of broad. So they are more like jack of all trades, and they typically operate at a level of product and stuff like that. Enterprise architects have the highest layer of abstraction of all architects. I think they are the ones who are responsible for driving the enterprise strategy, driving the whole IT strategy as a whole. So they work with all of these, and they are one of the key movers and decision makers within an enterprise. So that's a bit about architecture and architects. I have been an architect for quite some time, so I thought I'll share my experiences with you guys. And if you have liked the video, please do subscribe to it. It would mean a lot. Please do comment. Thank you. Bye bye.